Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, friends. Welcome, and I'm offering my welcome from another part of Ireland from where Terry is sitting. I'm down further south, down south of Dublin. My name is Paul Coughlan. I'm a professor in operations management at Trinity College in Dublin, and it's my pleasure to chair this breakout session for us for the next short few minutes. We have two contributors to the session. González Fernández, who's head of the Renewables area at the Fundación Asturiana de Energía. And Inda will contribute first, and he will be followed then by Dawn Murphy, who's a senior project manager and a colleague of Terry's at Action Renewables. Both Inda and Dawn will share a few thoughts first, and then we'll open it up to some questions and answers. We're still a small group, so please do put your questions into the chat function. I'll keep an eye on that. But also, as we're a small group, when the two presentations are over, we'll everybody flick on the cameras, and we'll see if we'll have a good chat. So, Inda, over to you first.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I'm trying to share my presentation. Sorry, I'm looking for the. Okay. I think. Okay. Well, my name is Indalecio. I'm head of Renewable Energy Department of the Fundación Energía. That is the regional energy agency of Asturias and one of the partners of the REDAWN project. As a starting point of my presentation, I would like to introduce the long-term strategy of Europe that, as I suppose that most of you know, is based in two main pillars. The first pillar is the digitalization of the economy. What is proposed in Europe is the digitalization of all economic sectors based on the implementation of the artificial intelligence and the high-performance computing and the use of data based on cybersecurity and trust. And the second pillar is the European Green Deal, which the main objective is the decarbonization of the economy based on the decarbonization of the industry, the transport, and the buildings. And I would like to emphasize that without leaving no one behind, what it means a just transition. I'm saying that because the objective of the REDAWN project is totally aligned with these two main pillars. REDAWN aims to foster the adoption of hydropower energy recovery technology in water networks in the Atlantic area, what means the decarbonization of the water networks, because we are contributing in the introduction of renewable energies in the supply of electricity, and the digitalization of the water networks, because we are facilitating the electrification of the water networks, and in this way we are facilitating the use of ICT technologies in the water networks. Taking into consideration this, we have carried out several studies to try to identify in which way we can benefit the water networks with the use of this recovery energy technology. With this approach, we have carried out 3 studies with Trinity College of Dublin, with Technical Institute of Lisbon, and Fundación Energía, in which we try to identify these benefits, the economic and environmental benefits, and to try to quantify in which way, which is the potential of the implementation of these technologies in the water networks. Related with the first point, the benefits, some of them have been mentioned in the session before, but I would like to indicate 5 main benefits. First, is the possibility of taking advantage of the excess of energy in the water networks, what means reduce problems related with the excess of pressures in the networks. Second is the improving the environmental footprint of the water networks. We can reduce our CO2 emissions with the use of electricity with renewable energy origin. And in this way, we can be aligned with this second pillar of the long-term the long-term European strategy. The third point is the reduction of the costs thanks to the reduction of the energy costs in the water networks. The fourth point is the improvement of the security of the energy supply. What is important in some areas, mainly isolated areas, where in these areas can have some problems with the supply of the energy. And finally, the fifth point is the possibilities for facilitating the digitalization of the network with a better access to the electricity, and in this way we can improve the management of the water networks. With these identified benefits, we try in our assessment, we try to quantify which way we are able to improve the management of our water networks. And for doing this, we try to identify some indicators that help us to quantify these benefits. For trying to identify the environmental benefits, we have selected the reduction of CO2 emissions related with the reduction of the electrical consumption. For this study, we took as a base the study that have been carried out by Trinity College of Dublin, related with the potential sites for installing microhydraulic technology in the water networks. In this study, in the whole Atlantic area, it has been divided water networks in 3 different kinds of networks: the drinking water network, the wastewater networks, and the irrigation networks. And we have estimated that in these networks, the total CO2 emissions in these related with the energy consumption in these networks is around 1.8 million tons of CO2 per year. Considering this, we have identified that there is a potential of reduction of 0.2 million tons CO2 per year, what means about 12% of this total emission. We have identified that the highest potential is in the irrigation sector, and that it's possible to reduce more than 50%, and the lowest potential is in the wastewater networks. We have carried out this assessment by countries, and we have identified that the country with the highest potential is Spain. That is the country with a more developed irrigation network, and this potential is around 25%. And the country with the lowest potential is Ireland, with only 4% of potential reduction. For trying to identify which is the potential in the implementation of the economic benefits, we use as indicator the reduction of energy costs related with the reduction of electrical consumption. In this case, we have estimated that in the whole Atlantic area, the water networks are consuming, or are wasting around 910 million euros per year. And we have estimated a potential of reduction more than 100 million euros per year, what means 12% of the total cost. The country with the highest potential is Spain, again, and the country with the lowest potential is Ireland. And by sector, the irrigation sector is the sector with the highest potential of reduction of cost, and the and the sector with the lowest potential is the wastewater networks. As a conclusion of all these results, I would like to indicate that with the implementation of this installation in the water networks, we can contribute to the long-term European strategy of digitalization and decarbonization of the European economy. We must take into account when we are trying to install a micro hydraulic system in the water networks, that there are not only economic benefits, but there are other additional benefits, maybe more, even sometimes more important than the economic, like the environmental benefits or the possibility of digitalization of the networks. And finally, I would like to indicate that the technology is a commercial technology, and that could be presented in the previous session, but it's necessary to improve the regulation or the legislation for facilitating this technology.
Linda, that's great. Thank you very much. And I think you've left us with a very nice transition into Dawn Murphy's presentation, where you say the technology is ready, but maybe the legislation and the policy environment isn't ready yet. So Dawn, please.
Okay, so I just want to give you a really brief overview of the work in this area of policy and social impact. So the objectives, I'm not going to read them all out, but they're on the slide there, just really to develop an understanding of how governments can facilitate the uptake of microhydro, trying to understand some of the problems associated with water innovation, and looking at country comparisons and benchmarking practices, and looking at the economic and social factors as well, positive and negative. So the approach that we took, we used various methods such as research in regional policy. We compiled a number of case studies, around 10 case studies of various types of microhydro, so not just PATs, throughout the Atlantic area. One of them is shown in the photograph there. That's our pilot in Palma del Rio in Spain. We also did some focus groups and surveys, polling sessions, things like that, and interviews with water professionals and energy professionals across the Atlantic area region. Sorry, next slide. So what did we find? Well, I just want to share with you a couple of different case study examples, just very briefly. I have two here from Spain and one from Ireland. So some of the key insights that came from the institutional supports and practices, and how these case study sites were managed, planned and implemented, and how they were supported as well by their regional energy policies. So for example, financial incentives and regulatory requirements. So these two Spanish examples are very different. One was a 92 kilowatt Francis turbine in the drinking water supply network in Mieres in northern Spain. That's the one on the right. And the other was a 32 kilowatt PAT in the irrigation network in Alicante. So the Mieres project took quite a long time to complete. There was quite a few complications and changes to the regulatory framework. At the time, selling to the grid was more economically advantageous for this particular site. So some of the barriers then, as I say, there was changes to the Spanish regulatory framework from a feed-in tariff to an auction system, which affected the economic feasibility. The auction process was complex and the benefits were low. There was changes to the regulation of self-consumption during this project. Grid connection was also an issue. It took quite a long time. There was no deadline imposed upon the grid operator to respond with a grid offer, which has been common in other regions as well. And the grid connection process itself is difficult, obviously, to navigate, especially for organisations that don't have much experience in that. So, in contrast to that site, we have the second site in Alicante in the irrigation network, and this was a 32 kilowatt PAT. And it was a bypass with an existing Francis turbine, and the owners of this plant wanted to exploit the water resource that they had and to sell to the grid. So there was an existing authorization in place for this, for the Francis turbine. There was also electrical infrastructure in place, and so there was no real administrative barriers noted in this particular installation because there was an existing proposal in place. And this site was also used as a demonstration by the manufacturer for other clients. And I've also just selected a case study from Ireland, which, although is not a PAT, it's an interesting installation. It's a 70 kilowatt Francis turbine installed by Irish Water at a reservoir in County Wicklow. And in this case, some of the barriers, again, administrative processes and license applications, they were quite complex to navigate and difficult as the organisation didn't have a huge lot of experience in this area. Grid connection, again, cost structures sometimes can be prohibitive for larger installations and sometimes have to curtail the optimum size for the site, so which happened in this case. So they wanted to install a 150 kilowatt turbine, but it was only possible to install a 90 kilowatt due to the connection availability. Lack of electricity buyers was also an issue whenever the turbine was first completed. So again, engaging with electricity suppliers at an early stage is important, but this is also an example of a lack of microgeneration policy in place at the time. So, so what have we learned from these case studies? Well, I mean, they present us with various policy and administrative issues. So regulatory barriers we can see still exist at national levels, and that can hinder the effort to deploy renewables like microhydro. So things like lengthy administrative procedures for approvals and permits, cost competitiveness, and policy instability, as we've mentioned, and sudden changes and stop and go situations. So so those are just some of the issues that we've found. I should also say we have other case studies from Portugal, UK, and France, and you'll hear about those in the other breakouts. For example, the pilot plant in Normandy. So these will be available in our final reports. So just finally, I just want to share with you, these are just some of the recommendations resulting from the work in this area and some of the implications for the future. So one of the aims of the Renewable Energy Directive is to ensure owners of renewable installations are paid the market rate for the electricity they export, which is a requirement of a stable legal framework, as shown in the Mieres example. So, business models are built on financial incentives, tariffs, export, auctions, and they need to be as clear and as predictable as possible. Grid connection policy, providing a simplified process, for example, under 50 kilowatts. In some regions, there's no deadline imposed upon the grid operator to respond with a grid offer. Planning constraints is another issue that's obviously important for all microgeneration in general, and ensuring the principles of maximizing self-consumption and energy efficiency, just to make the using the energy from microgeneration as simple as possible. And then technical barriers, obviously you'll hear a lot about that, the technical constraints and solutions from the other partners, but an example would be, say, to install smart meters to record excess generation. So that's just a really quick whistle-stop overview of some of the key findings. So I'll hand back to Paul, and if we have time, hopefully a few minutes, maybe for some couple of questions or discussions. And you know, there is 6 months left to run in this project, so if you do have any comments or input, it's welcomed, and it can be integrated into the project. So even if it's comments after this presentation. So hand back to you,
Wonderful.
Paul.
Yeah, wonderful. That's great. Thank you, Don, and thank you, Inda, very much. And there was a message came through from Mission Control while you were speaking to say
Right.
that we're extended for this session until 10:40.
Oh,
So
good,
we have
good.
about another 9 minutes, which is great.
Oh, that's good, good.
So maybe if everybody could switch on their cameras and join us now in a conversation, as Dawn finished by saying we still have about 6 months to run in this project. So we would really be interested to hear from you, your comments, your reflections, your questions, so that we can all learn a little bit from each other and from the project itself. I haven't seen any questions in the chat function, so I'm trusting in the fact that some of our, I see we have 19 participants in this, so some of our colleagues might actually frame a question. Any questions for Inda or for Dawn?
Hello, Dawn.
Hi.
Maria, hello.
Hi, Maria.
I've seen your presentation. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. You were talking about the barriers more for public places, because when you have private sections to install a micro, and if the people, the owners want to do it, in Portugal we can do it. Where is difficult is in a public facility. For instance, the public distribution of water in Portugal, we have some of those. Some are semi-private and the others are completely public. There is more complicated. But most of the cases when you have a private facility or property and the owner is interested in installing it, you manage to install it, and they're good with it. That's my experience. I don't know if you find it.
Yes, yes, I know what you mean. There has been some examples in our case studies where, yes, if it's a private organization, it has been a lot more simple, a lot more straightforward.
Yes.
But also, I think in the Mira's example, Inda will be able to maybe confirm, but I think the partnership of the public and private worked very well in that case, because the although it did have some barriers and problems, the public departments were able to work on things like the permissions and approvals because they had a little bit more experience with that, and the private partners were able to, you know, work on the technical aspects and
Yes.
and the engineering and the installation. So I think it can work well together. But yes, it does seem to be the case in the private installations, such as one of the irrigation case studies. It has been quite straightforward, and I think even with our pilot as well in the irrigation network, it has been quite straightforward. But then that one also had no grid connection, so it was a direct replacement of an oil generator. So there was again no approvals to get for no grid connection.
get further.
Good. And Inda, sorry, Maria, I'll just ask Inda. Inda, do you have a comment to add to Maria's question or in Maria's input?
Yes, well, I think that is I think it's a interesting point what is mentioned, Maria. I think that it's true that the situation is different if you are working with public authorities or public companies, or are you working with private companies, and in some cases you have some. In the case of working with public authorities, you can have some benefits, like I don't know, for them maybe it's easier to take the decision of installing this kind of technology because it could be more aligned with their I don't know, their other aspect different to the economic, only the economic aspect, because they are thinking in environmental issues, they are thinking in improving their management of improving the quality of the water or the security of supply, but it's true that when you are working with them, the pace of work is slower than if you are working with a private company. In the case of the private company, maybe they take more time for taking the decision of investment in the technology because they are considering the payback and other things that before than the environmental issues or other things. But it's true that when when finally they take the decision, it's easier to work with them because they work faster.
Good. Okay, and if I may stop you there, thank you, and thank you for the question, Maria. We have time. I've got a message for about one more question, so I'll throw it back over to our friends in this group to see if there's one more question.
I just got one because I've seen a very interesting thing in the French presenter from the company SCO, and he mentioned financing from FEDER of about 150,000 euros in 700. And people always ask about this because there's a tendency, a trend to go green. And people say, is there any public financing for this? Well, some years ago there was, and then it took a lot of time to people to get this financing, and people were, well, they gave up. And but now I've seen a very important financing from a European public institution, and that's a frequent question from people that are interested in hydros.
Yeah,
small
great stuff.
And did you come across with these new tools? Because we had given up because all these projects take so many time to be approved, and even when they are approved, they take a lot of time to get paid. So projects, people give up from this. But these in this particular case, this French project, they managed to get the financing from FEDER, and that is an important point.
Okay, I've just received a notice saying that our breakout room is going to close automatically within 1 minute. So let me first of all thank both Dawn and Inda for the very clear and informative presentations. I think they've prompted us very clearly to see that there are economic and environmental benefits, but there are policy challenges, and the policy needs to fit the particular context, and there are choices within that which I think become very clear. Thank you to everybody for participating in this. to Maria for her questions. And I imagine we're all going to be transported back to the plenary session painlessly within the next moment.
He provided a lot of the resource data for Work Package 4. And at that time, he passed on a lot of data and information to me on the, I think it was RPS had done some, feasibility on sites that could potentially, be a pilot for a PAT. And that's one of our case studies is that pilot. But in saying that, it didn't actually turn into a PAT. It didn't. The installation didn't happen because it was discovered at a sort of later stage that some of the water was pumped back up, and that would be ineligible for rocks. So that it got sort of through to a certain stage. They'd done the calculations and it looked like it was going to be feasible, but without the rocks, it turned out it wasn't going to be feasible. So that is one of the other case studies which I've included, even though it didn't go ahead. We thought it's important to include it because it shows why it didn't go ahead, because of the policy, because of the incentive. The financial incentive wasn't there. If that had been in place, the rocks were available, it probably would have gone ahead. So but they did quite a lot of work up until that point, business models and that sort of thing. So it was on their agenda back then. I think as the 2 or 3 years have passed, they have been focusing more on PV, on solar PV on the roofs, and they own a lot of land, as you know. So that's really been their focus in the last wee while. But so the answer, I don't know if they will come back to it. Ian seemed to think that they would return to it at some point to look at other potential pilot sites. But I think without the rocks, I think that really kind of drew a bit of a line under it from that point of view, and that the PV was more advantageous to them. So maybe until they exploit all the PV potential, they won't go back to it again. But I mean, there could be someone here from NI Water who could correct me. I don't think there is, but
do you know which is one of the problem in Italy? That it is a strange kind of problem, but if you save energy from water utilities, these savings go directly in the bill of the users. So basically, the company has no advantage, apparently, in producing energy or reducing the use of energy. And this is a strange mechanism. So probably a part of the energy recovery would be used as an incentive for the company to make, for example, investment in green products or in charging cars, but something that can be used by the company and not directly.
Well, that's an interesting. It's an interesting model, Armando, because you can see the advantage of passing the savings on to the customer as well. And clearly, then I presume the more that the energy company invests in this technology, then the greater the savings they can pass on to their customer, and hence their customer base will grow, presumably.
Yeah, but I know, for in Italy, for example, we make tender for the management of the network. Mm-hmm. But these tenders are basically won always by the same companies because they know very well the network, and it is very easy to make an advantage offer for the management of a network, And so the perspective is that probably in 10 years, you have to make a new tender for the management, but basically the advantage that you gave to the users are not really a part of the selection of the water manager or the water utilities. So this mechanism of passing all the savings to the end users is, of course, you have a better reputation probably as a water company, but it's not so. It is not so. It doesn't give much incentives to the water utilities that have to face a larger work in managing the network, because if you put a PAT or if you take an energy device, of course you have to manage it, and so make it harder to make the management of the network. So
we need a business expert like Paul Coughlan to intervene.
Yeah, I think so. He has to make a new model for for this kind of problems.
Yeah, it comes down a little bit to what are the incentives for the different actors, the different parties in this to actually do something, and or is it by penalties? And you know, we can have evidence of the two kinds of regime. And in addition to that, there's also the value that the various parties would put on small interventions. Now, I know Dawn gave an example of a rather larger installation, but fundamentally the various PAT installations that we're hearing about on the broad scheme of things are relatively small scale. And so, you know, why should anybody bother to put all of the effort into a small scheme that will yield some benefit? There is an exemplar in terms of engaging in that kind of thinking, and it comes to us from the manufacturing area, and in particular the whole idea of lean thinking, which values micro improvements which collectively add up to significant improvements, but they're distributed in a manufacturing setting throughout the firm, but in our context here throughout, let's say, the water network. And so it requires a different mindset to appreciate those micro contributions that are made, and then to incentivize the realization of those.
I'm trying to propose this within a general efficiency check of the network. So basically, if they call you for making, for example, a more efficient system for pumping, there are very large savings involved in this kind of change of the network. And you can put inside this changement also energy production, because there it is the sum of all this, as you are saying, is the sum of all these large or small technical changes that make the total amount of savings that you can do. But also, when you can save a lot of money, there is this problem of transferring directly the advantage to the end user. That is a kind of negative barrier for the implementation for the technicians. So you have somehow to add value to this policy by giving money also to the technicians, and to make a kind of improvement of.
Yeah, but in Ireland we had in our another water project that we're working on, Durisca, we had a wonderful example of cost savings being realized through the installation of a PAT-based recovery system in a group water scheme, in a community water scheme. And over the period of a year, they saved approximately 2,300 euros in electricity costs. And the operator and the, I guess, the owner of the scheme came together, and they had a choice. They said, could we just put the savings into the profit and loss? Could we put the savings and redistribute it to the users? And they said no. They identified a water charity in Africa. And so they made a donation of the entire sum to a water charity in Africa. Now, 2,300 doesn't sound like a lot of money, relatively speaking. But in that context in Africa, it was 2/3 of the cost for refurbishing a well for a rural community that would deliver their necessary water for the next 20 years. And, you know, that was a wonderful example. Yes, you could call it charity or philanthropy, but it was a real example of extending the mission of the various organizations involved here, where they saw that it was part of their responsibility to share some of the benefits from an environmentally friendly initiative that they took. So it's another model.
So basically, but it is somehow disconnect the two things. So you can, it's not necessary that it's possible to make this this change. It's just that your company have to make a donation to the charity for the same import that you earn from the micro plant.
They had the choice.
Yeah, they had the choice. No, it is interesting.
They had the choice,
Yeah.
and they linked it explicitly, and they made they invited the charity down to the water treatment plant, and made the explicit link between the savings that had been made, the environmental efficiency that had been achieved, and the benefit to a rural community in part of the developing world.